Wooden boards creaked beneath its weight, and the old West town stood quiet in a way that felt wrong, like a held breath before a hard truth. People had gathered without speaking, faces turned toward the platform at the center of town. No one smiled. No one met another's eyes for long. This was frontier life, where judgment traveled faster than mercy, and a lie could hang heavier than any rope. She sat on the rough planks with her back against a post, wrists bound, ankles chained, her dress torn and stained by days of dust and fear. Her hair hung loose, dark and tangled, framing a face that carried more strength than her body showed. She had stopped crying hours ago. Tears did no good here. In this old West town, a woman alone carried blame the way others carried scars. They had called her a liar since the day she arrived. She came down one of the forgotten trails with nothing but a small bundle and a look in her eyes that made people uneasy. She said she was looking for a place to rest. She said she had run from something she could not name without shaking. The town heard only pieces. Whispers filled the empty spaces. A woman without a man was already trouble. A woman with a story was worse. The rancher watched from the edge of the crowd. He stood apart, hat pulled low, hands rough and still at his sides. He was known in this town as a quiet man. He worked his land hard and spoke little. His ranch sat a mile beyond the cottonwoods, where the ground turned stubborn and the nights grew long. Folks trusted him because he kept to himself. They respected him because he never asked for more than he earned. He had been alone longer than most remembered. He saw her the first time she passed through town, dust on her hem, fear hidden behind straight shoulders. She did not beg, she did not plead. She met the stares like a person who had learned that lowering her eyes only invited worse. Something about that stayed with him. In a land where survival bent people into smaller shapes, she remained upright. The town did not like that. They said she lied about where she came from. Some claimed she brought trouble with her, that bad luck followed her steps. Others whispered darker things, tying her past to a Native American tale they half remembered and never understood. Old fears ran deep in frontier life. The land had seen blood before. Memory clung to it like shadow. Children watched from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and silent. They did not understand all of it, only that something terrible was happening and that grown folks had decided it must be so. One small boy held a wooden horse, gripping it tight as if it might run away too. The preacher read from a paper with a shaking voice, words meant to sound sure. The lawman stood nearby, his hand resting close to his belt, though there was no fight left to stop. Justice in an old West town often came dressed as certainty, even when truth had been buried. The rancher remembered the night she came to his land. She had collapsed near the fence line, feet bleeding, breath shallow. He found her there by chance while checking a broken rail. She tried to stand when she saw him, pride flaring even then, but her body failed her. He carried her inside without asking questions. He set water by her lips and waited until her eyes opened. She told him some of it in pieces. A journey gone wrong. A promise broken. A man who smiled too easily. She spoke of a child she had lost somewhere along the way, though she could not say how or where. Her voice cracked then, and she turned her face away, ashamed of grief in front of a stranger. He did not press her. In cowboy romance, folks liked to believe love came fast and easy, but frontier life taught a different lesson. Trust grew slow, if at all. He let her rest in his spare room for 2 nights. On the third morning, she left without a word, leaving behind a small cloth tied with a string. Inside was a simple beaded charm, worn smooth by time. A Native American woman might have made it, long before the land was divided and named. He kept it. Now he stood watching her sit beneath the wooden beam, the rope swaying slightly above, moved by the same wind that once pushed her down the road toward him. The town had decided her fate. They said she had stolen. They said she had lied. They said her past caught up with her at last. None of them knew what he knew. He had found tracks near his land the night after she left. Horses not from town. Men who rode light and careless. He followed those tracks until they disappeared into stone. He told no one. Silence had always been his habit. Silence had kept his ranch whole and his life simple. But silence had a cost. She looked up then, eyes searching the crowd, not for mercy, but for one face she hoped might be there. When her gaze found him, Something passed between them that no one else saw. Not hope, not fear, recognition. The quiet understanding shared by two people who had crossed paths on a forgotten trail and been changed by it. The rope creaked again. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some turned away. Some leaned forward, hungry for an ending that would settle their unease. The old West town believed order came from hard choices, from cutting away what did not fit. The rancher felt the weight in his chest grow heavy, like a storm pressing down before it breaks. He thought of the children who would remember this day, of the boy with the wooden horse who would learn what justice looked like here. He thought of the beaded charm hidden in his coat pocket, of the story she never finished telling, of the truth that sat with him like an unpaid debt. A Wild West love story was not meant to begin here, under a gallows with a town ready to turn its back. Cowboy romance was supposed to be quieter, shared between glances and long rides beneath open sky. But frontier life rarely followed the stories people wished were true. The lawman cleared his throat. The preacher folded the paper. This was the moment when the rancher understood that saying nothing was no longer the same as doing no harm. His hand moved to his coat, fingers brushing the worn beads. The wind shifted again, carrying the smell of dust and sweat and old wood. Somewhere beyond the buildings, a hawk cried, sharp and lonely. She lowered her head, not in shame, but in resolve. Whatever happened next, she would meet it standing inside herself, even if her body was bound. The rancher took one step forward. In an old West town built on half-truths and fear, one voice had the power to change everything. And as he moved from the shadows into the open, he knew that the truth he carried would not save them both. It would only decide who paid the price. The crowd fell silent as he opened his mouth, and the wind seemed to wait with them. The rancher's step onto the packed earth sounded louder than it should have. Boots turned toward him, faces tightened. The lawman paused, hand lifting slightly, unsure whether to stop him or let him speak. In this town, a man known for silence stepping forward carried its own kind of threat. He did not speak yet. His eyes stayed on her, on the way she knelt with her shoulders straight despite the rope cutting into her skin. He saw dirt on her cheek where someone had shoved her earlier. He saw the tremble she fought to keep from her hands. He remembered those same hands wrapped around a tin cup in his kitchen, careful not to spill a drop, as if waste itself were a sin. The preacher cleared his throat again, uneasy. "If you've business," he said, trying to sound firm, "now's not the time." The rancher lifted his head slowly. "It is," he replied. His voice was rough from disuse, shaped by wind and long days without words. It carried farther than he expected. A murmur moved through the crowd. Some shifted their weight. Others crossed their arms, already prepared to dismiss whatever came next. He looked away from the platform then, just for a moment, letting his gaze drift past the buildings, past the hitching posts and the dry troughs, toward the open land beyond town, toward the place where his life had settled into quiet routine after it broke apart. Years earlier he had ridden back from a cattle drive to find his cabin burned low and empty. Smoke still curled from the earth. There were no tracks left to follow, no bodies to bury, just a small blanket half buried in ash, and the knowing that whatever he had lost was gone for good. Folks offered words then, clumsy and brief. He thanked them and returned to work. That was how men survived in the Old West. They kept moving or they did not survive at all. Silence became his shelter. He built fences where memories used to live. He rose before dawn and slept after dark. He spoke only when necessary. The land responded better to that kind of man. The land did not ask questions. Until she arrived, her past came to him in fragments over those 2 nights. She spoke while staring into the fire, never at his face. She told of a settlement farther south, one that promised safety to travelers. She told of work offered and kindness given too quickly, of men who smiled and listened and then took more than they claimed. She said she escaped in the dark barefoot, carrying a child wrapped tight against her chest. She stopped there. He did not ask about the child. Some questions were not meant to be answered aloud. The town had filled in the blanks themselves. They said she stole a horse. They said she killed a man who tried to help her. They said she brought sickness or bad spirits or both. A Native American tale twisted and retold until it became a warning rather than a memory. In frontier life, Fear often wore the mask of wisdom. Now those same stories circled her like wolves. The rancher felt the weight of eyes on him. He could feel how easily they might turn if he said the wrong thing. This town had given him space and left him alone. That had been their unspoken bargain. Speak now, and the bargain would break. She lifted her head and met his gaze again. There was no plea in it, only a quiet question. Would he stand or would he turn away like the rest? He swallowed and forced his voice steady. She came to my land, he said. The crowd stiffened. She was hurt, he continued, near done in from walking. I took her in for a spell. The lawman stepped closer. Why didn't you say this before? Because no one asked, the rancher replied. A ripple of disapproval moved through the people. Some shook their heads, others whispered. Helping a stranger was one thing. Keeping quiet about it was another. She told stories, a man called out. Different ones each time. She told what she could, the rancher said. Pain don't come out neat. The preacher frowned. Did she admit to stealing? No. To harming anyone? No. The lawman hesitated. He had expected more, something clearer, something easier to weigh. Frontier justice thrived on certainty. This was not that. She left your place, the lawman said. Why? The rancher looked at the ground. He remembered waking to an empty room and the chill that followed. Because staying felt dangerous, he said. For her? The truth of that settled heavy between them. The crowd murmured louder now. Some faces showed doubt, others hardened further. An old West town did not change its mind easily. To do so meant admitting it might have been wrong. The woman closed her eyes briefly, breath slow and controlled. She had known this moment might come and had prepared herself for disappointment. Survival had taught her to expect it. Her memories rose unbidden. She remembered her mother's voice singing low while grinding corn, the way the sound carried comfort even when there was little else. She remembered the day men rode in from the east, uniforms dusty, smiles wide, promises of protection, promises of work, promises that meant nothing once the doors closed behind them. She remembered running through brush with her child tied tight, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She remembered falling, feeling the weight slip from her arms, hearing a cry cut short. She remembered waking alone. That was when she learned that grief could hollow a person without killing them. She had followed forgotten trails north, guided by instinct and half-remembered stories told by a Native American woman who once shared a fire with her family. The woman had spoken of places where the land itself remembered kindness, where spirits watched quietly rather than judged. She had hoped this town might be one of those places. It was not. The rancher felt her distance even as he spoke for her. He knew that words could not cross all the ground between them. That ground was made of loss and fear and things never spoken. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, jaw tight. Why should we believe you now? She said. Why speak only when it's too late? The rancher met her gaze. Because I was wrong, he said simply. The words landed harder than any shout. Admitting fault was rare here, dangerous. The lawman rubbed his chin, torn. There are men coming, he said quietly, asking after her. Rough sort. The rancher's head snapped up. When? Soon. That knowledge settled like a shadow over the platform. Frontier life was never isolated. Violence traveled along roads and rumors. The town stood at a crossing now, whether it liked it or not. She opened her eyes again, hearing enough to understand. Her jaw tightened. If men were coming, then this place would burn whether she stayed or not. She had seen it before. Trouble followed her like a curse, and others paid the price. Her gaze found the rancher one last time. A silent apology passed between them. He understood it and shook his head almost imperceptibly. The wind rose again, lifting dust into the air, blurring the edges of the crowd. Somewhere beyond town, thunder rolled low, distant but growing. A storm was moving in, slow and certain, the kind that soaked through everything and left nothing unchanged. The preacher folded his paper with trembling hands. The rope above creaked once more. Nothing had been decided. Nothing had been saved. The town stood balanced on the edge of its own choosing, and the truth, once spoken, had only made the fall steeper. The rancher stayed where he was, heart pounding, knowing that whatever came next would reach far beyond this platform. The first drop of rain struck the dust like a warning. It darkened a single spot on the hard ground, then another, then a scatter of them, until the old west town seemed to flinch beneath the coming storm. Folk shifted their feet, pulling coats tighter, glancing toward the western sky where clouds piled up like a bruise. Still, no one moved away from the platform. A crowd could endure weather better than doubt. The rancher stood in the open as if the rain belonged to him. He watched the woman on the boards, and in the wet light her face looked younger and older at once, as though sorrow had lived in her too long. He could feel the town's eyes on his back, measuring him like they measured cattle, deciding whether he still fit among them. The lawman stepped closer to the platform, careful now, like a man approaching a horse that might bolt. "If men are coming," he said, "we need to know who they are." The rancher held his gaze. "They rode near my land," he answered. "2 nights after she left. I seen their tracks. You followed, a little, and you said nothing." The rancher's jaw tightened. "I said what I had to say to keep my ranch." A bitter laugh came from somewhere in the crowd. "His ranch," a voice muttered, sharp with judgment. It was the kind of line that could sour a room, the kind of line that turned neighbor against neighbor. Frontier life was built on sharing hardship, but also on guarding what little you had. People admired a man who worked hard. They resented a man who stayed safe while others took risks. A second voice followed, louder. "This is what she does. Comes in, brings trouble, and leaves folks paying for it." The woman's head lifted at that, eyes flashing, but she said nothing. If she spoke, they would call it proof of guilt. If she stayed silent, they would call it proof of shame. There was no right move left. The preacher's hands trembled as he held the folded paper. "We cannot ignore the law," he said, voice thin. "A town must stand for something. A town ought to stand for truth," the rancher replied. The preacher looked away, pained. He was not a cruel man, but he was a careful one. He had buried too many people in this soil to believe he could afford uncertainty. He wanted peace, even if it came with a stain. The rain thickened, a soft hiss on the boards. People began to pull back from the platform, more from discomfort than conscience. Some drifted under awnings. Others lingered, unwilling to leave before seeing what happened next. The lawman turned his head slightly, speaking low. "You can't just claim she's not guilty because you fed her," he said. "There's a dead man down by the creek." The rancher stiffened. "Dead? A drifter," the lawman went on. "Shot or stabbed, hard to say." He had her scarf in his pocket. Her breath caught. The scarf had been a strip of cloth she wore around her neck when she first came through town, faded blue with a small stitched border. She had lost it on the road. She remembered reaching back, feeling empty air, and telling herself it didn't matter. It mattered now. She spoke for the first time in a voice the storm could not swallow. "That scarf was taken from me," she said. The crowd leaned in, hungry. "By who?" someone demanded. She hesitated. In her mind, a face rose up, a man with eyes that smiled while his hands did wrong. But naming him would pull the whole town into a fight it did not want. And if he truly was coming, naming him might seal her fate even faster. "I don't know," she said, and the lie, small as it was, tasted like iron. The rancher heard it. He saw the way her gaze slid away, the way her mouth tightened after. He knew she was protecting something or someone, or simply protecting herself from telling a truth too large to carry aloud. The lawman's voice softened, and in that softness there was a warning. "You need to tell me what you know," he said. "If men are riding in, they won't care about our doubts. They'll take what they came for." A child began to cry somewhere under an awning, frightened by the thunder that rolled closer. A mother hushed him, stroking his hair. The sound of comfort in a place of judgment made something twist in the rancher's chest. He remembered holding a small hand once, his own child's hand, warm and trusting. He remembered promising that nothing would ever harm them. He remembered the way promises sounded strong until the world tested them. He glanced at the woman again. Her wrists were raw. Her hair clung damp to her temples. Yet she held herself with a stubborn dignity that made the rope look ashamed. She did not belong on a platform like this. She belonged under open sky, walking forward, even if forward meant pain. He took another step, closer to the boards, and the lawman lifted a hand as if to stop him. Don't, the lawman said. Not unless you mean to do something you can't undo. The rancher looked up. I already did, he replied. The lawman's eyes narrowed. What? The rancher reached into his coat and drew out the beaded charm. The rain darkened the leather string, making the colors stand out, reds and blacks and pale bone, shaped with care and old meaning. It was not just decoration, it was a sign. An older woman in the crowd sucked in a breath. That's not town work, she whispered. The rancher held it up. She left this at my place, he said. She didn't steal it. She didn't take from me. She gave. The crowd shifted again, uneasy. Gifts carried obligations in this land. A gift could bind people tighter than law. The woman's eyes fixed on the charm. For a moment, her face softened, the hard edges of survival easing. That charm had belonged to someone she once loved like family, someone who taught her how to hide in plain sight, how to listen to the land. She had meant it as payment, or as thanks, or as a farewell she could not say with words. She had not expected it to return to her in public. The rancher's hand stayed steady, but inside him something shook. He wanted to cut her loose. He wanted to lift her from those boards and carry her out of town into the storm. But that would make him an outlaw, and it would make her trouble twice over. He had lived by staying on the right side of things, even when the right side tasted bitter. Now he stood at a line he could not see until he reached it. The town had its own troubles beneath the surface, and the storm pulled them up like roots. A shopkeeper who had once lent her bread now stood with his arms crossed, jaw set. He had helped her in secret and been shamed for it. People had stopped coming to his store for a week. His children had gone hungry for pride. He looked at her now with anger that was not truly hers to carry. You see what you do? He muttered, not loud enough for all to hear, but loud enough for her. You bring out the worst in folks. She heard the hurt beneath it and lowered her eyes. She had never wanted anyone punished for kindness. Under another awning, a young woman watched with tears in her eyes, hands clasped. She had spoken to the accused woman once, just a short conversation outside the general store. The accused woman had asked about work, about shelter, about whether the schoolhouse took children. There had been hope in that question, fragile and quiet. The young woman's husband had slapped her later for speaking to that liar. She had not spoken since. Now she stood hidden, trembling, seeing in the platform not just another woman's fate, but her own trapped life. Frontier life held many cages. Not all of them had ropes. The rain came down harder and lightning flashed, bright as a gunshot but silent for a breath before the thunder hit. A horse whinnied somewhere behind the crowd, nervous. People flinched. The lawman leaned toward the rancher again. I'm trying to keep order, he said. If those men arrive and find her gone, they'll tear this town apart looking. If they arrive and find you standing against us, they'll tear it apart for spite. The rancher's voice was low. And if she stays, he said, they'll take her. The lawman did not deny it. The woman on the platform listened, heart pounding, and in her chest rose the old familiar fear, the kind that made the world narrow. Men coming, men who smiled while they hunted, men who would not stop with her. They would punish anyone who tried to help. They would prove their power the way cruel men always did. She took a slow breath and forced herself to speak steady. If they're coming, she said, then you should let me go. A startled murmur ran through the crowd. Some laughed bitterly. Others looked offended, as if she had no right to ask anything. Let you go, the preacher echoed, stunned. After what's happened, nothing happened, she said, voice cracking slightly. Not here, not by me. The rancher's eyes stayed on her. He could see what she was doing. She was offering herself as a sacrifice to spare them. It was a choice shaped by loss. She had already learned what it meant to live while others paid. She could not bear it again. And yet the rancher felt something else beneath her words. A yearning. Not for freedom alone, but for belonging, for one place where she did not have to run. For one person who would look at her and see more than rumor. He felt it because he had lived it. The storm pressed down. The crowd thinned as people fled to dry spaces, but a hard core remained, stubborn as stone. The lawman stepped up onto the platform, boots thudding, and his presence made everyone tense. He looked at her, then at the rancher. If I delay this, he said, voice careful, I need reason. Something solid. The rancher's mind raced. Solid. Proof. In a town where words were wind, only evidence could anchor doubt. His gaze flicked toward the edge of the street, toward the livery where a young stable boy stood half hidden. The boy's eyes were wide. He looked as if he wanted to speak and feared what speaking would cost. He had seen things. The rancher recognized that look because he had worn it once long ago when he discovered that truth could make you a target. The rancher took a breath. There's more to this, he said, loud enough for the boy to hear. And someone here knows it. The stable boy flinched. The woman on the platform saw it too, and her heart dropped. If that boy spoke, the men coming would kill him. She knew that as surely as she knew the storm would reach the ground. She shook her head, just once, small and sharp, warning him without words. The rancher saw her warning. He understood her fear. And in that instant, love felt possible, not because it was safe, but because it was reckless enough to exist even here, under rain and judgment. It was fragile as a candle in wind. A distant sound cut through the thunder. Hoofs. Not close yet, but coming, steady and many. The crowd froze, and even the rain seemed to hesitate, as if the land itself was listening. The lawman's face tightened. The preacher gripped his paper like a shield. The rancher's hand closed around the beaded charm until it bit into his palm. And the woman, bound beneath the rope, lifted her chin toward the road, eyes dark with knowledge, as the riders approached the town that was already breaking apart. The sound of hooves grew clearer with every breath, no longer something imagined, but something real, measured and closing the distance. It rolled down the main street like a drumbeat, slow and deliberate. Even the rain seemed to pull back, thinning to a cold mist as if the land itself wanted to watch what would happen next. Men stepped out from under awnings. Women gathered children closer, doors creaked shut. Frontier life had taught them when to hide and when to stare straight at danger. Today, most did both. The rancher did not move. His eyes stayed on the road, on the empty stretch between buildings where the riders would soon appear. He felt the weight of every choice he had made in his life settle onto his shoulders at once. Silence had protected him for years, but now it stood exposed, fragile as glass. The lawman turned sharply. Untie her, he ordered. A gasp moved through the crowd. The preacher stared at him. You can't mean that. I mean delay, the lawman said. If riders are coming, I won't hand her over tied like an offering. Two deputies hesitated, then moved toward the platform. One reached for the rope at her wrists. The woman closed her eyes briefly as the tension eased, circulation rushing back with sharp pain. Her breath shook, but she did not cry out. The rancher exhaled, not relief but a heavier fear. Untied did not mean free. It only meant choices came faster now. The rope above her head still swayed, slow and mocking. The deputy stepped back. She stood, unsteady at first, then straightened, bare feet planted on the boards. For the first time since her arrival in town, she stood at eye level with everyone who had judged her. Mud streaked her dress. Her hair clung damp against her neck. Yet there was something in her posture that stilled the murmurs. The riders came into view at the far end of town. 4 of them, spread loose, confident. Their coats were dark, their hats low. They rode like men who expected doors to open for them. One horse bore a fresh brand, unfamiliar. Another limped slightly as if worked too hard and given no rest. The woman's heart hammered so loud she feared others might hear it. These were not all the men she feared, but they were enough. They carried the scent of the past with them, the promise that running only delayed the reckoning. She felt the rancher's presence beside her, though he did not touch her. That nearness steadied her more than she expected. The riders slowed near the platform. One of them smiled, wide and easy. The same smile she remembered from another place, another lie. Her stomach turned. The lead rider tipped his hat toward the lawman. Heard there was trouble, he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. Heard you had something of ours. The lawman crossed his arms. You heard wrong, he replied. This is town business. The rider's smile did not fade. His eyes slid to the woman, then back to the rancher, lingering there with interest. That's so, he said. Funny how our business keeps crossing your roads. The rancher met his gaze, cold and steady. Funny how your business leaves bodies behind. A flicker passed through the rider's eyes, something sharp and quick. He laughed lightly. Dangerous words, he said. Dangerous men, the rancher answered. The air tightened. Even the children had gone quiet now. The woman took a small step forward, heart pounding. This doesn't need to touch this town, she said. Let me go with you. The rancher turned sharply toward her. No, she met his eyes, and in that look was gratitude and sorrow tangled together. If I stay, she said softly, they'll punish you. They'll punish everyone. That's not your burden, he replied. It always has been, she said. The rider chuckled. See, he said, gesturing between them. Even she knows how this ends. The lawman raised a hand. You don't take people from my town without cause, the rider's smile thinned. We have cause. He nodded to one of his men, who reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a folded cloth, blue, faded, the scarf. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She was carrying this when she fled, the rider said. Our man died with it on him. That makes her involved. The woman's breath caught. She felt the past surge forward, heavy and suffocating. She had seen that man fall, heard his shout cut off, not by her hand but by another's. She had run because running was the only thing she knew how to do. The rancher stepped closer to her, his voice low. Tell him, he murmured. Say what happened. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes for the first time since morning. If I do, she whispered, no one here is safe. The rider leaned closer, catching pieces of their exchange. Secrets, he said pleasantly. Always costly. Thunder cracked overhead, closer now, sharp and loud. A child screamed. The horses shifted, uneasy. The lawman hesitated, trapped between order and conscience. He could feel the town splitting, fault lines opening beneath familiar faces. Whatever choice he made would mark this place for years. Give us time, he said finally. You'll stay outside town until morning. The rider's smile vanished. No. He swung down from his horse in one smooth motion and took a step forward. The deputies tensed. Hands hovered near belts. The rancher moved without thinking. He stepped between the rider and the woman. Gasps broke out. Someone shouted his name. The rancher did not look back. You want her, he said. You go through me. The rider's eyes flicked down, then back up, measuring. You're not worth the trouble. Maybe not, the rancher said. But I'm not stepping aside. The woman's breath stuttered. Don't, she whispered. Please, he shook his head once. I already lost what mattered most, he said quietly. I won't lose you to my own fear. The words hung between them, fragile and raw. Love, unspoken until now, revealed not through tenderness, but through defiance. The crowd shifted. Some faces showed awe, others fear. A town built on caution did not know what to do with a man willing to stand like this. The rider studied them both, then glanced at the crowd. You all ready to bleed for her? He asked lightly. Silence answered. The rancher felt the weight of that silence like a blade. He understood it. Frontier life taught people to survive, not to be brave. He did not blame them. The woman closed her eyes, tears spilling freely now. She had never wanted to be chosen at this cost. Hoofs sounded again, closer this time, but different, faster, lighter. A second group appeared at the edge of town, dust swirling behind them. Not riders like these. Townfolk, neighbors, a few men from nearby ranches who had heard rumors and ridden in, drawn by instinct more than certainty. Hope flickered, dangerous and bright. The rider noticed, too. His jaw tightened. This is getting crowded, he said. The lawman straightened. You're not taking her, he said, voice firm at last. Not today, the rider laughed once, sharp and cold. We'll see. He turned slightly, signaling his men. Tension snapped tight as wire. The rancher felt the woman's hand brush his arm, light and desperate. He did not pull away. He stayed where he was, heart pounding, knowing that whatever came next would demand everything he had left to give. Thunder roared overhead as rain finally broke loose in earnest, drenching the town in seconds. The platform slicked underfoot, faces blurred behind falling water. And in that chaos of rain and fear and gathering riders, the truth she carried pressed against her chest, aching to be spoken, knowing that once it was, nothing would ever be the same. The rider took one step forward. The rancher did not move. and the town held its breath, balanced on the edge of a choice that would either save them or tear them apart. The first shot did not come from a gun. It came from the truth. The woman stepped forward before anyone could move, before fear or pride could pull her back again. Rain soaked her hair and dress, but she stood tall, voice rising clear through the storm. "I didn't kill him," she said. "But I saw who did." Every sound seemed to fall away. Even the thunder felt distant. The rider's smile vanished at last. His hand drifted toward his belt, slow and careful. "You best mind what you say," he warned. "I mind it every day," she replied. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "He tried to take my child. He thought I was alone, but another man followed us. One of yours. He wanted what he thought belonged to him. They fought. Your man fell. I ran." A murmur surged through the crowd, sharp and alive. Heads turned, eyes searched the riders' faces. The stable boy stepped out from behind the livery then, shaking so hard his knees nearly buckled. "It's true," he said. "I seen them ridin' that night. I seen one come back alone, cleaning blood from his hands at the trough." The rider spun on him. "You lying little—" The lawman's gun cleared leather in a blink. "That's enough!" Rain plastered hair to faces. Horses stamped and snorted. The other riders shifted, suddenly less certain. This was no longer an easy taking. This was a town waking up. The rancher did not look away from the lead rider. "You rode in thinking no one would stand," he said. "You were wrong." The rider laughed once, bitter now. "You think words change what men like us do?" "No," the rancher said. "But they change what men like us allow." The lawman raised his voice. "Drop your weapons. All of you." For a moment, it seemed no one would breathe. Then one of the riders let his gun slip into the mud. Another followed. The lead rider hesitated longest, eyes burning with hate, before finally stepping back. The storm broke fully then, rain pounding the earth as if washing something old away. They took the riders into custody, bound and disarmed, the truth settling heavy and undeniable. The scarf was returned to her hands, no longer evidence but a relic of survival. The stable boy was pulled close by his mother, who wept openly now, pride and relief tangled together. When it was over, the platform stood empty. The rope above swayed useless and forgotten. The woman sank onto the steps, exhaustion flooding her limbs. The rancher knelt beside her, not touching at first, just close enough that she could feel his warmth through the rain. "You should have run," she said weakly. He shook his head. "I ran enough for a lifetime." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the loss carved into his face, the years of quiet endurance. "I didn't mean to bring this to you," she whispered. "I know," he said. "You brought truth instead." The town changed that night, though no one said it aloud. Folks spoke softer. They looked at one another longer. The preacher tore up the paper he had folded so many times and burned it behind the church. The lawman sat with the rancher until dawn, talking about lines that mattered and lines that didn't. They buried the drifter properly, with no name but a marker. It was more mercy than he had shown in life. The woman stayed, not because she was asked, because for the first time since she lost everything, she was not being chased. The rancher offered her a place at his land, no conditions, no promises. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "Or leave when you're ready." She stayed. Days turned into weeks. The land healed slow, like people did. She worked beside him, learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way the wind spoke before weather changed. At night, they sat on the porch, quiet but not lonely, watching stars spread across the sky like scattered hope. Sometimes she spoke of her child. Sometimes he spoke of his family. Grief did not vanish. It softened. The town came around in small ways. A loaf of bread left on the porch, a repaired fence done without asking, children laughing near the creek again. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the hills, she placed the beaded charm back in his hand. "I think it belongs with you now," she said. He closed her fingers around it instead. "It belongs where you are." She smiled then, a real one, fragile but growing. Love did not arrive like a storm. It came like rain after drought, quiet and life-giving. It came in shared work and shared silence. In the understanding that staying was its own kind of courage. When winter came, it came gently. And in an old west town that once called her a liar, a woman finally found a home, and a rancher who once said nothing learned that truth, spoken at the right moment, could save not just a life, but a future. The wind still moved through the main street,